Yeah. Okay.
As we keep visual activism kind of in our thought process, part of the motivating, I can't help but think after reading some of Rosemary's work and seeing some of her videos online, I'll post some of these links through our Facebook and our Tumblr, that part of the driving force behind any sort of physical violence enacted on different bodies, whether it's based on race or class, sexual orientation, gender, disability, what have you, that part of that is just an inability to see the body the way that body demands to be seen.
Definitely.
And so, go ahead. Let's go ahead and move into this, because I think
Right.
this is a good example of where we might need that somehow.
You know, I read this article the other day, and I sent it to Benny immediately, and I shared it on my own Facebook. It's definitely tragic news, which is unfortunate to be reporting after all the tragic news right now going on. But it's still important to discuss. Now, this is on gaystarnews.com. It's a web magazine, and it's reported by Rakshita Patel. On May 17th of this year. 78 trans murders in 2013 total so far.
78.
78 trans people have been murdered so far, and that's just reported murders, right?
And that's globally, to be sure.
That's, yes.
Yeah, and so I think that's one of the huge things that to mark is that it's 78 murders globally
right,
so
in
far.
13 countries.
Right, that are
from
reported.
January to April this year, and there were. Now let's try to grasp this. There were 1,233 reported murders of trans people worldwide in 59 countries, and this is from 2008.
Since 2008 till now.
Since 2008 till now, and these figures are being collected by a trans murder monitoring project by Transgender Europe.
Yeah, it's just very, I mean, these numbers are just, they're staggering, and unfortunately an everyday reality for trans people.
Right.
That becomes kind of a way that we may or may not approach the world, that this is just a reality. Not that means that we're afraid, so much as it's a reality, that
It's
this
scary.
could happen, right?
It's very scary.
Right.
And it's scary that I'm sure a lot of you have not heard this news.
Yeah.
It's frightening. It's really frightening. The vast majority of the murders were in Central and South America. 78% of the globally reported murders of trans people were in Central and South America, with 468 murders in Brazil zone. Yeah.
And I think that part of that is, and this brings us to this whole notion of how these murders are reported, how
Right.
these violences are reported. Part of that article, if I can jump in too, if that's okay,
Please do.
is just this notion of countries that have more organized, recognized trans populations tend to be the places where you will see the most violence enacted on those bodies. And that's not just for trans, that's for LGBT, lesbian, gay, bi, trans, intersex, queer, across the board, across the rainbow spectrum, if you will. And in these countries throughout South America, you will see the various types of what we might in the States here call transgender in various capacities. We do not have the same type of recognition, and as a result, it's not that we have less murders, and this is where I kind of take issue with this article here. It's
Okay.
not that, like it says here, the vast majority of murders were in Central and South America. 78% of the globally reported murders of trans people, 958 to be short, were in Central and South America. It's not that we have less in America, okay? And I don't need the numbers to state this type of thing. It's that in America, we do not recognize trans bodies as being trans.
Right.
What we have are misreportings. And what we end up having is
A man in drag.
a man in drag who miraculously was murdered for no reason at all.
A man living a double life.
Yes, a woman who for some reason was confused and was wearing men's clothing. So it's not that it could have, this person could have been a trans woman, a trans man, a butch lesbian, a really femme boy, what have you. It's a matter of this kind of essentializing of these bodies. And this brings me to, and I'm going to rustle the paper because this is how angry I watched. That's how angry I am. I had to do that. is that on May 10th, and this made some news here and there, and I don't know if you're aware of this out there, but in Ohio, recently, there was a trans woman, CeCe Dove is her name, from Cleveland, was found murdered. She was found at the bottom of a lake, brutally murdered. It was awful, which tends to be also a tendency, the way that trans bodies are handled by people who murder us out in the world. And the headline on May 10th on Cleveland.com was, quote, Andre Bridges of Parma charged with aggravated murder and death of Carl Eckhoff. Now here's the thing. Andre Bridges was the one who allegedly murdered CeCe Dove. Carl Eckhoff is the birth name of CeCe Dove, not even referring to her as CeCe Dove in the title of the article. They say, no, you're Carl. And the way that they described CeCe in the article was using it pronouns, I-T, it pronouns. And then also describe CeCe Dove's clothes. They went through all of the tricks of the trade, if you will, to say this is what this crazy person was wearing when it was murdered. Like, absolutely awful. And without being marked as a trans person, in retrospect, right, there was a lot of backlash against this media coverage, and part of the justification was the Associated Press doesn't allow for trans bodies, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Just report she. That's all you have to do. It boggles my mind, because as a result, this is a prime example of how CeCe Dove's murder can get erased as not being a trans murder.
Right, and this is so unsurprising.
Absolutely.
This happens so much in media coverage of trans people.
Absolutely.
It's definitely important to speculate the attacks that aren't being represented as trans and specific.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, I'm completely with you, and I feel like this entire article, I don't know, I'm just,
Why don't you rustle the paper?
Okay. That's how angry I am. I just how frequently I see this in reporting around trans bodies, or even bodies that we speculate as being gender variant in some way. If a person is dressed in one way, there's a good chance, let's just use those pronouns. Let's just use those pronouns. Why have to start speculating beyond this? It's just absolutely ridiculous to me. The article does also state the highest absolute numbers of trans murders were found in countries with strong trans communities and trans or LGBT organizations that carried out professional monitoring, indicating that the global problem is far greater. Essentially, that means that when you have a better system, a more efficient system that says this person's this person is this person, meaning this person's trans, this person's gay, it's easier to mark these bodies if they're found dead, for instance. But then on top of that, there's also a monitoring system. I think it's like it's a paradox, or a catch-22, I guess is another way of saying that.
Right.
Of being stuck in a position of wanting to highly organize, but at the same time, that organizing is going to really reveal those numbers as higher, more prevalent numbers. So, I guess as a side note, this is a useful thing that comes out of this article here, is the Trans Murder Monitoring Project was initiated in April 2009, and it is working to collect, monitor, and analyze the reports of homicides of trans people worldwide. And so it is a watchdog group, if you will, that's watching news reports of dead bodies, murdered bodies that may actually be trans, and more accurately reporting those bodies as being trans. And I find that to be a useful resource in terms of helping us to see the broader scope of just how real this experience is, the violence enacted on trans bodies, or in terms of visual activism, not seeing us maybe the way that we want to be seen.
Exactly.
So that being said, another bravo, Ari. Wonderful segue as we move into our last segment here on CeCe McDonald.